Today is your first day of review for your STAAR test. So today we're going to be covering functions and scientific notation. We're going to go ahead and start off by talking about functions, and then in a separate video we'll be discussing scientific notation. So I'm going to go ahead and press here on this cover, and it's going to take me to this page here. So this page is going on your first page of your STAAR review foldable. So here's my cover. Once I open it up, this will be going right here. So this is the foldable that we'll be looking at today. So here is my foldable, and whenever we are looking at functions, we're looking at 4 different types of things to determine if they are functions. We have coordinates, we have tables, mappings, and graphs. So just to discuss them a bit before we go ahead and get into some examples. So for your coordinates, or for starters, functions is when each x value is paired with a unique y value. So in other words, your x's cannot repeat. So looking at your coordinates, we're going to look at each x value. So here I have an 8, a -7, and a 6. So here my x's have to be different. So x's must be different. And if you notice, I don't have any repeating x values, so this here is a function. I'm going to put an F for function. Then we also have tables. So again, your x's must be different, and you're just looking at the values in the x column. Your y's, it's okay if they repeat. You're just looking at your x's. And I see that none of them repeat. I have a -2, a 0, a 2, and a 4. And some of you might get tripped up thinking a -2 and a +2 are the same, but they're not the same number. So this is also a function. And again, your x's must be different. And then we get down here to mappings. So for instance, let's think of x's as our people and y's as our bus stop. So, or this is bus stop. So here, for instance, we have -2 as a person. They can't get off at both bus stop 1 and bus stop 2. They can only have one bus stop. So if we were to convert this to a table, here's my x's and here's my y's. This might be able to help you picture this a bit more easier. Here I have -2, and it is being paired with a +1. Again, I have -2 being paired with a +2. I have -4 being paired with 3, and -6 being paired with 4. Converting this to a table allows me to automatically see that I do have x's repeating. I have a -2, I have 2 -2s. And also on a mapping, you can automatically tell if it's a function or not if you see 2 lines coming from one x value. So these 2 lines are pairing my x value with 2 different y values. And again, this mapping is not a function. Then we get into graphs. And your graph has to pass the vertical line test. Now remember, vertical means going up and down. So I'm going to be drawing lines going up and down to determine if my graph passes through it more than once. And if it touches my line more than once, then that tells me it's not a function. So going here, if I draw my vertical line test, or if I do the vertical line test, it passes. If I go here, it passes. If I go here, it passes. Every time I do the vertical line test, this graph passes it, so this tells me that this is a function. Again, a function is every x value has to have exactly one y value. So x's can't repeat. So let's talk about this a bit further. Let's go ahead and talk about coordinates. But really quickly, this is what your foldable should look like right now. Okay, again, this was a function. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at our coordinates. So for coordinates, for the coordinate example for number 1, it says which coordinates do not represent a function. So remember, when we're looking at coordinates, we're only looking at the x values. So for A, I'm going to go ahead and circle all of my x values, or I'm going to underline them. So I have 2, 3, and -2. If I'm looking here, I don't see any of my x values repeating. Remember, your y values can repeat. That's fine. I can have the same x and I can have an x as a 3 and a y as a 3, and they be different ordered pairs. Again, I'm just looking to make sure my x's don't repeat. My x's do not repeat here, so this is an example of a function. And again, I'm looking for one that does not. Then I go down to b. Again, I'm going to look at my x values. So I have a -2, a 5, and a 10. None of my x values repeat, so this is a function. For c, I have 2, 0, and I have another 2. So since I have two 2's for my x values, this tells me that c is not a function. And then we also have to look at d. I could have more than one answer, but we don't know. Let's go ahead and check. So again, I'm going to look at my x values. I have an 8, a -7, and a +6. So none of my x values repeat. So again, this is a function. And the one here that does not represent a function is c. So for this foldable right now, this is what you should have copied down. If you need a second to pause, go ahead and pause it. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and close this foldable. And we're going to look at the next section, which is going to be mapping. So on your foldable now, we're down here, and we're going to go ahead and open this up, and we're going to look at number 2. So let me go here. And for number 2 says which mapping represents y as a function of x. So remember for mappings, every x value has to be paired with exactly one y value. I can tell which one is not a function by determining or looking at how many lines are coming from one x value. I should only have one line coming from each x value. So looking at A, I have -2 being paired with -4, -1, 3, and 5. And here my question is asking me which one represents a function. So I am looking for a function here. So if I were to draw these out as tables, I would have -2 being paired with -4. I would have -2 being paired with -1. I would have it being paired with 3 and 5. Since I have so many lines coming from one x value, this tells me this is not a function. If I continue looking at C, again, I can draw a table out. If this will help you, go ahead and do it. If you can determine it just by looking at the lines, I see -3 being paired with -2 and a +2. I see my x's being paired with 2 different y values, so that's telling me that this is not a function. But if you can't see it that way, you can always write it out. So -3 being paired with -2, it's also being paired with a +2. Then I have 2 being paired with -1, and I also have it being paired with a +1. So if you see here, I have my x values repeating. So again, this is not a function. And then we have B. So if it helps, again, go ahead and write out a table. I have 0 being paired with -2. I have 1 being paired with a +1, 3 being paired with a +4, and 4 being paired with a +4. So if you do notice here, none of my x values repeat. I do have my y values repeating, but that's okay. I have 2 x values going to 1 y value. That is also okay. I can't have 1 x value going to 2 different y values. So this is a function. Let's go ahead and look at D just to make sure I don't have more than one answer. So for D, I have, I'm going to go ahead and draw out a table for us again. So I have -3 being paired with -2. I have -1 being paired with a +1, but then here I have a +2 being paired with a -3, and I also have it being paired with the -5. So this is telling me that this is not a function. I have x values repeating. So A, C, and D are not my answer, but B is. So the foldable here, you should have at least this written down on your foldable. If you went ahead and wrote all the mappings, that's perfectly fine. That's going to help you out in the end. So if you need a second to pause, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get into the next type of function, which are tables. So again, we're getting into tables, and here it says which table does not show y as a function of x. So here we're looking for the one that is not a function, so NF. So again, we're only looking at our x values. We don't care if our y values repeat. So for our x values here, we're just, for f, we're just looking here. So here I have a -2, 0, 2, and 4. None of my x values repeat, so this is a function. Then looking at h, I have a 2, a 4, a 4, and a 6. Well, here I have 2 4s, so this tells me that this is not a function. And then lastly, g, I have, again, just looking at my x values, I have a -3, a -1, a +1, and a +3. Some people might think this is not a function because they see 2 1s and 2 3s, but you have to remember that a -3 and a +3 are not the same number. So this is a function. None of my x values repeat. So the table here that is not a function is going to be h. H is my answer. So now looking at your foldable, this is what your foldable should look like here. So if you need a second to pause to catch up, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, we're going to get into the last type of function, which are graphs. We're going to be right here in this flap. Okay, so I'm going to go back home, and we're going to go ahead and look at graphs. So for number 4, it says, which graph represents y as a function of x? Now remember, whenever we're looking at graphs and trying to determine if they are functions, we have to check to see if they pass the vertical line test. So here, again, we are looking for the one that is a function. So it has to pass the vertical line test. So looking at letter F, I'm going to go ahead and draw my vertical lines. And here I see it automatically already does not pass the vertical line test. So this is not a function. Then I look at H. I can put my vertical line anywhere on here. I'm going to go ahead and put it here. I see that it passes through twice. So this is not a function. Looking at G, this itself is a vertical line. So whenever I draw a vertical line, it passes through all these different points. So since it has more than one x value, it passes through multiple points. This is also not a function. And then lastly, J, if I draw my vertical line, it passes only one time. It checks out. If I pass through it here, it only passes one time. If I go here, again, it only passes one time. So this here tells me that this is a function, and J is my answer. Okay, so looking at your foldable, this is what it should look like for number 4 for tables. I'm sorry, for graphs. Okay, so that was functions. Again, just walking you through here, coordinates. We're looking at all of the x values to make sure none of them repeat. For mappings, to determine if they are functions, every x should be paired with exactly one y. So here for, on this mapping, I have an x being paired with 2 different y values. I have 2 lines coming from one x value, so that tells me it's not a function. And again, looking at tables, I'm just looking at the x column to make sure none of my x values repeat. Now, sometimes you might have these in rows, so you would just be looking at the x row. So again, my x's can't repeat. And then again, for graphs, you're just trying to make sure that it passes the vertical line test. And again, this is going to be glued at the very top of page 1 sideways. Okay, so that was functions. Go ahead and watch the next video for scientific notation.